my granddaughter-in-law, one of my great-grandsons, and somebody else, I think one of my granddaughters. It's not Callie, I don't think, but one of the others. They've got stuffed sloths and shirts with a sloth on it, and so I don't know. To me, they're an ugly thing. Of course, they're part of God's creation, but they're not all that becoming in my book, but a lot of people must think they are. And so there happens to be a whole lot of stuff said in Proverbs about the characteristics of a sloth. Now, the sloth, they come in various kinds, like most other animals do. There's a three-toed sloth and a two-toed sloth, and I don't know what else. But they're slow-moving creatures. They spend most all their time hanging upside down, like the picture you've got, on a limb. And I guess whoever named, I don't know which came first, the use of sloth and slothfulness and the slothful in the Bible. I don't know whether that translation of the word came first or the animal came first. But anyway, a sloth, because he's slow moving, because he never gets in a hurry. In fact, he looks to be lazy. Now, I don't guess he really is, because that's his nature. That's how he was created. In fact, one thing I read said that a sloth can, if he stays busy, can move about 40 yards a day. Well, that's not even half of a football field. But the odd thing is, and I didn't know they even got in water, but somebody has observed in water they're pretty swift. They can swim pretty fast, but as far as moving on land, they don't. And there's some other things about them that are sort of interesting. Most of them don't have any teeth, except maybe some of them have a few molars, they say. And they eat fruits and vegetables, mostly what they can find in trees, apparently. And so they stand for the idea of being real slow. And in our book, in our way of thinking, being real slow like that is equivalent to laziness. So it's interesting how many things Proverbs has to say about the slothful. The slothful means a person who is sort of like a sloth. Slothfulness means that people follow the ways of a sloth. So you can use the word lazy and slothful in the same way, but in Proverbs there are I think I counted 15 passages that have something to do with laziness or slothfulness. That's why I said what I did a while ago. I don't know of any of you that are lazy. You may be, but I don't know it. But this is not a lesson designed to necessarily improve us, but it's a way to look at things in the Scripture and get the message from it. And not only that, but it's very interesting. In fact, there are 2 or 3 occasions in Proverbs when slothfulness is talked about, and it's in a humorous way, and it's easy to understand. Mention a few things about Proverbs. The Hebrew word, well, there's several words in Old and New Testament that can be translated a proverb, but the one that appears quite often and has to do with the lesson this morning is the word mashal. And a proverb means it's a saying, it's an adage, it's a similitude or a similarity of something. But I found a definition from a Hebrew expert I'd never seen before. And the definition of a proverb is putting this and that together. So a proverb is where you take something understood and you put it together with something that's maybe a little less understood, and it makes it clearer, makes it plainer, makes it more easily understood. So the Proverbs are the wise sayings of Solomon and Agur and King Lemuel's mother in chapter 31. And some of the Proverbs were written directly by Solomon, and others were recorded by Hezekiah. He knew what Solomon had said. And so the Proverbs are made up of these chapters, primarily Solomon's teachings or Solomon's sayings. I want us to look at some of them. I'm going to go in order so you can keep track and find it easier. But before that, let me mention 3 passages in the New Testament. Hebrews chapter 6, verses 9 through 12. In the New King James says, "Do not become sluggish." Well, that's this word we're looking at. That's this word which stands for don't become lazy, don't become negligent, don't become, where we don't pay attention to what's going on. In Hebrews 12, verses 9 through 13, especially verse 11, says, "Not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit." So to lag in diligence means that you let your energy down, you let your job down, you're not doing the Christian, of course that's talking about spiritual things, we're not doing the things we ought to do as a Christian. And Matthew 25, verse 26 in particular, this is where Jesus told about the fellow who gave 3 of his servants money to use while he was gone. We call that the parable of the talents. And the first fellow had done well with what the master left him in charge with. And he had the declaration when the master got back, "Well, you did a good job. Well done, good and faithful servant." The next fellow had been given 2, and he did the best he could with those 2 and gained some more, and the master was pleased. And the third fellow, who had just been put in charge of 1 talent, $1, we'll say, he was afraid to do anything with it, so he hid it. And when the master came back, he went and got it and handed it to him and said, "Now, here's what you left me in charge of." And in verse 26, the master said, "You wicked and lazy servant." So being slothful in the sense that the Bible talks about is being lazy, being negligent, not paying attention to what you're supposed to do. So we're going to look at some passages. Some of these you've heard time and again. Maybe some of them you haven't taken quite as much note about. Look in I'm still using the same Bible that y'all gave me December of 2000. It's about to fall apart, but I'm still using it. And I'm doing my best to make it do me the rest of the trip. So this way, as well as a lot of other ways, I think of y'all quite often. Not because my Bible's falling apart, but because of where it came from. Okay, in Proverbs chapter 6, we're going to start there. And I want you to notice some of the things that are said about this particular subject. Verse 6, "Go to the ant, you sluggard." Now, this word sluggard is the same as slothful or lazy or whatever. So whenever these different words are used, it's talking about the same thing. "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, overseer, or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, gathers her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep?" So Solomon is addressing this in his teaching. He's addressing this to people that are not doing what they ought to do. And they're not doing that because they just don't want to. They don't want to put out the effort. And he says you can learn from insects. You can learn from the ant, for instance. And every time I talk about ants in Proverbs or whatever, I always think about, I used to, like in the summertime, especially when I was a kid, sit down somewhere in the shade for a little while and you get to see the ants crawling along, and it's not uncommon to see this small butterfly wing moving through the grass. And you look close and it's a little tiny ant that has a hold of this great big inch-long butterfly wing, and he's working his way to wherever he's going to eat it or store it or whatever he's going to do with it. And sometimes it takes them quite a while, a lot of effort to get it from one point to the next, but they just keep on. Solomon is saying, look at creatures like that. God created them, and they're doing what they're supposed to do. And so we can learn from the ant who stores up food and so forth. Now, what's the application? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. So the person who is lazy, and I seriously doubt any of you would fit this category whatsoever, but this world's full of lazy people. They basically are either sitting back or lying back with their hand out. They want somebody else to take care of them, somebody else to feed them, somebody else to do this, that, and the other for them. And then they wonder why they're always lacking. They're lacking because they're a sluggard. They are a slothful person. They are lazy. And they pay more attention to sleep and slumber and folding of their hands. And poverty comes on them like a prowler. They all of a sudden wake up one day and they don't have enough to eat, or they don't have money to do this or that or the other, and they have, as we would say sometimes, fiddled their life away. They've wasted their life by not being busy. The public in general needs a good dose of Solomon's advice here. Okay, look at chapter 10. Verse 5. He who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. So the person who plans ahead, looks ahead, works for what's ahead, is a person who's wise. And incidentally, a lot of the Proverbs amount to advice that Solomon is directly given to his son. Of course, it applies to everybody, but it's Solomon as he talks to his children, shall we say. So the person who lays up for himself in the summer then is a person who's going to survive the winter. And the person who sleeps during harvest, in other words, he's rested and vacationing or doing whatever it is he does, when he ought to be working toward winter when he can't do those things. I remember a long time ago, I guess I saw this guy a few times while we lived in Alabama. But in North Alabama, there was this fella that you could pass by on the road, on the highway, and he was laying over in his front yard. And I don't know, I have no idea what the real story was, but here's how it came through to me. He would lay out in the front yard in the summertime, springtime, and he would take a straight chair and turn it over so that he could sit on the ground and then lean back against the sloped back of the chair. You may have done this sometime or another. But anyway, so he would lay there, and he was barefooted, and he was all sprawled out, propped up on the back of this chair. And as you'd go by, he didn't even raise his hand to wave. He usually had his feet crossed, or had one knee up and the other leg across that. He just waved his foot. And I always thought, I wonder if that guy is that lazy. Now, that may not have been the reason. I'm not trying to judge him. But I always thought, at least in my mind, that's an illustration of laziness. Too lazy to even, wave at you. And every car that went by, he'd wiggle that foot. It was sticking up, from leg propped across his knee. And he did that, I guess, all day long, every day. And so, to me, regardless of his reason for that, that was a picture to me of the slothful person, or the lazy person. That sort of illustrated this in my mind. Okay, chapter 10, verse 26. As usual, I'm getting over bronchitis again. In verse 26, as vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes. Now, think about what smoke in your eyes does for you. It causes irritation, causes something you don't like. And if you take too big a swallow of vinegar, then it sort of sets your teeth on edge or that kind of thing. So, as vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him. You send somebody who's a sluggard, somebody who's slothful, you send them to do a job, and you just about figure your reaction when you hear the report is going to be, sort of clench your teeth and that kind of thing. It's going to be a bad report. If you send somebody lazy to do a job, you're going to get a job not done or only half done at best. And so that's why the Proverbs are so fascinating, is because they're just everyday, down-to-earth kind of things. Remember that definition, putting something together with something else. We can understand the frustration, as well as the humor, as well as the disgusted reaction from somebody who is lazy. I sort of had my memory mixed up, apparently, but I remember on an episode of The Little Rascals. Y'all remember them? Our Gang, Little Rascals. I couldn't remember who this was, and I had Tricia look this up yesterday when I was thinking about this lesson. And there was one little boy on the Little Rascals whose name was Farina, Farina. He was a boy. And here are some of the things that it says about that character on the internet. His defining characteristic is his laziness and desire to do nothing. I don't know whether you remember Farina or not, but I remember somebody on there. In fact, he was so lazy that they had one entire episode, The Little Rascals, based on him called Lazy Day. So, he is the picture of laziness. But the thing I remembered about him, and I was thinking it was another one of the characters, but there's a little bit of disagreement on the internet about who it was, but they claim it was Farina. He's so lazy that one day, best I remember, he was lying in a hammock. And as he was lying there, he said, Spanky, will you get this fly off my nose? In other words, he was so lazy and so good for nothing, we'd say, he wanted somebody else to shoo the fly away that lit on his nose. Anybody else remember that? I didn't dream it. I finally decided maybe I sort of dreamed that, but it's reported on the internet. So Solomon talks about some people that's about like that. And I think that's a good illustration. Okay, chapter 12, verse 27. The lazy man does not roast what he took in hunting, but diligence is man's precious possession. It's sort of strange somebody be this lazy, but got enough energy to go hunting or fishing or whatever, but he's too good for nothing to even dress it, use it. Now, there are situations I know, but just as a general rule, this is the picture of somebody who is too lazy to cook what he actually went and got that should be for food. Okay, chapter 13 and verse 4. I hope you're looking at these because they're pretty powerful. The soul of a lazy man desires and has nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made rich. I think, and I'm pretty sure you'd agree with me, one of the reasons there's so much theft, stealing, is because people are too lazy to go out, work for it, build it, make it, whatever it takes to get it. It's the lazy person steals. And you find that's an exact characteristic. The soul of a lazy man desires, but he has nothing until he takes it away from somebody else. It's sort of the next phrase of that could be added. Now, chapter 15 and verse 19. The way of the lazy man is like a hedge of thorns, but the way of the upright is a highway. What the person who is slothful, the person who doesn't want to help himself, what does he always end up with? Well, I can't do this because of so-and-so. I can't do this because of so-and-so. Of course, that so-and-so is generally, it takes too much energy or effort. But anyway, so when it talks here about, in verse 19, the way of the lazy man is like a hedge of thorns. The person who's not willing to put out the effort to do whatever it is the person who is going to be hindered. He's not going to have what he wants to have. He's not going to have what he needs to have. He's not going to accomplish whatever it is because he's too lazy. And so, incidentally, I forgot to explain, depending on what version you're using, lazy and slothful and sluggard, those are all used interchangeably. It means the same thing. But the way of the upright is a highway. The person who does what he ought to do, the person who puts out the effort, the person who's willing to work, the person who's willing to accomplish whatever it is, even in the spiritual realm, is the person who is blessed with things going well. Chapter 18 and verse 9. He who is slothful in his work is a brother to him who is a great destroyer. You probably, those of you that have worked in public places, you've probably worked with some of these people somewhere along the line, maybe a lot of them. And that is, the person is lazy in his work. He doesn't do his job. He doesn't carry out his responsibilities. He doesn't pay attention to what he ought to be, to his duty. He's one who destroys. In some particular job, in some particular setting. And by the way, this is true in the church. If a person who is supposed to do a certain thing, which is every Christian to the best of their ability, a person who doesn't do what he's supposed to do, it hurts everybody else. Because here is one person, or 2 or 10 or whatever, one person who doesn't do his duty, and that throws an extra load on other people. And what happens sometimes when, regardless of what the situation is, whether it's religious or secular or whatever, what happens sometimes when just a few people end up with the whole burden for what a whole bunch of people ought to be doing, what happens to the few who do that? They sometimes just get frustrated and fed up, just quit too. And that happens easily in congregations where there's a few people who are doing everything, others refuse to carry any of the load, and it gets so burdensome that finally the good people who are trying their best to take care of everything, they finally just get tired, and it doesn't excuse it, but you can see why they do. They quit. And so these principles apply all through life. Okay, 1915. 1915. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep, and an idle person will suffer hunger. So, all this goes hand in hand. Being lazy causes somebody to want to sleep. When they want to sleep all the time, they end up hungry or needy in some respect. And that's not to say everybody who's needy and everybody who's hungry is lazy. But the lazy person will end up in this kind of situation. You can turn it around that way and realize it. Incidentally, I failed to mention a while ago, there are 13 quotes in the New Testament out of Proverbs. Not all of them have to do with the sluggard and the lazy person, but there are 13 quotations in the New Testament. And one of the big ones is Hebrews 12, where Proverbs 3, 11, and 12 are quoted and applied to the Christian life. Okay, 1924. A lazy man buries his hand in the bowl. This is one of my favorite ones. This is actually humorous. Sometimes people say, well, the Bible is so boring and so sad and serious, and it is serious. And if you don't want to know, then it can be boring. But the people who want to know what the Bible has to say are eager for it. But anyway, this is a matter of humor. A lazy man buries his hand in the bowl and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. Now that's trifling. That is lazy. Here's somebody who's got a bowl of soup, and he's got his spoon and he has his spoon down in the bowl, but he's too lazy to raise the spoon up and bring it up to his mouth. Well, now that's an exaggeration, almost. There are people, I think, who are that lazy, that no good, that unwilling to help themselves, if that's the case. All right, chapter 20, verse 4. The lazy man will not plow because of winter. He will beg during harvest and have nothing. Every time I read this verse, I think about the fellow who was talking to some other people, and he was talking about his house needed repair. And he said, one of the things that my roof leaks like everything. And the guy said, well, why don't you do something about it? Well, he said, when it's good weather, it doesn't leak. And when it's rainy weather, it's too wet to work. So, that's the kind of thing this verse is pointing to. During harvest, the fellow said, well, it's too hot or too dusty or too dry or too something. And when it's wintertime, he said, I'm not going to plow or do anything preparatory to my farming because it's cold weather. So, it's the old idea, if you want an excuse for something, you find an excuse. Pretty easy to find. Okay. Let's see, where do we get to? Chapter 21. beginning at verse 25. The desire of the lazy man kills him. You can apply this figuratively or literally either one. For his hands refuse to labor, to work. He covets greedily all day long, but the righteous gives and does not spare. So the lazy person, as I said a while ago, he always wants what somebody else has got. And always government has to deal with this kind of thing. There are always people who want something, but they want somebody else to provide it. And on you go. All right, let's see. 22, verse 13. The laziest man says, there's a lion outside. I shall be slain in the streets. Well, there's that idea. If you need an excuse not to do something, you can hatch up one, you can cook up one. I want to save any more comments for just a little bit later on that one. Chapter 24, 30 through 34. I went by the field of a lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding. And by the way, this equates not having understanding with laziness. It means a person he's not thought this out. And there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. So Solomon says that he saw this guy's farm, and it was all overgrown with weeds and thorns and so forth. The wall was broken down, and everything was falling apart. Why? Because the fellow that owned it was lazy. So here's Solomon's application. When I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and received instruction. He said, I learned something from seeing this guy's place. Here it was, all untended. He didn't pay any attention to it. And of course, there are other reasons a place can get like that, but in this case, the fellow was lazy. He just didn't want to work. And so all of this is falling apart. And he says, I learned something from it. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. So shall your poverty come like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. Solomon says, if you don't take care of what you need to take care of, then you're going to find one day it's all gone. And various ones of us do it for various reasons, but that's true for some other things as well. I don't consider myself lazy. I hope I'm not. But my old barn is about to fall in. And it's because I haven't done anything to stop it. I haven't fixed the roof. Some of the tin's gone now. Now, in my case, my excuse is I haven't had time. But the point is still the same. If you neglect something, it's going to deteriorate. That's the nature of the creation. You know, there's a scientific principle. I forgot exactly what it's called right now, but it's the idea that everything winds down. You know, as time passes, things deteriorate. As time passes, if you don't keep it going, if you don't help it along, then it gets in bad shape. And so Solomon says, you know, you may be in poverty someday because of what's happened along that line. Okay, then chapter 26. This is the last one. This one helps explain the two passages ago. The lazy man says, there's a lion in the road. of fierce lions in the street. Now, think about what's being said here. The fellow who needs to get out and tend to something, maybe his roof, maybe whatever. The fellow who is lazy and doesn't want to do what he needs to do can find an excuse. And so this fellow says, well, I probably ought not go out. There might be a lion outside. You know, it's possible, not very likely, but it's possible that when we dismiss today and you open the door to go outside, it's possible there could be a bear out there. Now, it's not very likely, but it can happen. It's, you know, the black bears from the east are slowly coming into middle Kentucky and middle Tennessee. And, you know, if you want an excuse not to go out, you can come up with an excuse. There might be a bear out there. There might be a lion. Might be a snake on the porch. Of course, not from now on for a few months, but, you know, there's always something that we can think about to keep us from doing what we need to do. But the lazy man says, well, there's a fierce lion in the streets. But here's his real nature. As the door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. He's so interested in doing nothing that he just tosses and turns. And, you know, an old door that needs oil on the hinges, what does it do? It squeaks and it goes slow. And so the lazy person is lying in his bed, doesn't even have enough energy to turn over quickly. He just, like a door on its hinge, turns over slowly and so forth. The lazy man buries his hand in the bowl. It wearies him to bring it back to his mouth. The lazy man is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. The person who is too contrary, too lazy, too good for nothing to do what he can do. Now, obviously, this is not talking about people that are not physically and or mentally able, but the person who just doesn't want to do what he can do to help himself is always looking for somebody else to help. And he thinks he's smart. See, a lot of these people that are taking disadvantage of our system, they're milking the system. They think they're smart. They think they've got it figured out above you and me because they know how to get somebody else to give them what they should be providing for themselves. Again, I'm not talking about charity. I'm not talking about genuine needs, any of those things. I'm just talking about the person who is slothful, the person who is lazy. So you have at least these passages in Proverbs, and you have passages in other places that deal with the idea that we're supposed to do our duty. We're supposed to do what God intends for us to do. Whether it's by way of providing for ourselves, whether it's by way of our service to God, whether it's by way of being a part of the Lord's family, the church, and doing our part in that. No matter what the situation is, there's no excuse, and apparently no excuse in God's sight, for anybody to be lazy, to be slothful, to be like the old sloth who hangs around upside down and just doesn't do much for himself. Well, that's all of our Proverbs, and that's all of our time. Anybody have a comment you want to make? I won't ask if you know anybody like some of these, because everybody does. We all know people like this.
I have a hard time getting my students to read and study. They just don't want to read much anymore. And I hope as Christians we never get to the point where we don't like to study and we don't like to, spend time on God's Word.
Yeah, the willingness and desire to study the Bible has gone down too, yeah. We live in this age of easy access, or supposedly easy access to most everything. Information and all of that, you know, you can do this, do that, do the other, but to fend for ourselves and to work for ourselves and so forth is not as popular as it used to be. Of course, there's always been the people like Solomon wrote about here, because that's how he wrote about it, because there were plenty around in those days too. Okay, our time is gone, so hope you gain some kind of benefit from this.
Appreciate you and your experience here, John.
Thank you.
They went to Wisconsin for a birthday party. I know. I hope they don't get snowed in there and get home. Yeah.